World War I was a conflict engulfing nations and empires. The Ottoman Empire, allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, found its vast territories under increasing strain. Its centuries-long dominion over the Middle East was beginning to fray at the edges. Britain, a leading Allied power, keenly observed these developments. They sought opportunities to weaken their Ottoman adversaries. A crucial part of this strategy involved looking for allies within the empire itself. The Arab populations under Ottoman rule presented such an opportunity. Thus, the stage was set for a clandestine dialogue. This dialogue, known as the Hussein-McMahon correspondence, commenced in July 1915. It was a series of 10 letters exchanged over several months. These letters would profoundly shape the future of the Middle East. Sir Henry McMahon was the British High Commissioner in Egypt. He acted as the primary British negotiator in this sensitive exchange. His correspondent was Sharif Hussein bin Ali, the Hashemite Emir of Mecca. Sharif Hussein was a respected Arab leader, a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He held significant religious authority as the guardian of Islam's holiest cities, Mecca and Medina. His political influence extended throughout the Hejaz region of Arabia. The letters between these two men explored a potential alliance. The British sought an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. The Arabs, represented by Hussein, sought independence and self-rule. The correspondence was a delicate dance of diplomacy amidst global war. British motivations for engaging with Sharif Hussein were driven by stark imperial interests. The primary goal was to destabilize the Ottoman Empire from within. An Arab uprising would create a new front, diverting Ottoman troops and resources. This would relieve pressure on other Allied fronts, including the critical Gallipoli campaign. Furthermore, Britain had vital strategic assets to protect, most notably the Suez Canal. The canal was the lifeline to India and its other eastern colonies. An Arab entity friendly to British interests in the region was therefore highly desirable. Securing Arab support was also part of a larger vision for a post-Ottoman Middle East. Britain aimed to emerge as the dominant power in this strategically vital area. McMahon's task was to achieve these objectives through promises and persuasion. Sharif Hussein, for his part, harbored significant ambitions for his people and himself. He dreamed of liberating Arab lands from Ottoman Turkish rule. For centuries, Arabs had lived under Ottoman sovereignty. While the early Ottoman period saw some benefits, the later years, particularly under the Committee of Union and Progress, the Young Turks, saw a rise in Turkish nationalism. This often came at the expense of Arab cultural and political aspirations. Hussein envisioned a large, unified Arab kingdom stretching from Syria in the north to Yemen in the south. He also entertained the idea of reviving an Arab caliphate, with himself as Caliph. The Great War presented a unique, if risky, opportunity. He believed that by aligning with the Allies, Arabs could achieve their long-sought independence. The core of the correspondence revolved around a fundamental exchange. Britain offered to recognize and support Arab independence. This was the central promise. In return, Sharif Hussein and his followers were to launch a widespread revolt against Ottoman forces. McMahon's letter, dated October 24, 1915, is often cited as the key document. In it, McMahon stated that Great Britain was prepared to recognize and support the independence of the Arabs in all the regions within the limits demanded by the Sharif of Mecca. This pledge, though cautiously worded and containing certain exclusions, was electrifying. It provided the impetus for the Arab revolt, which officially began in June 1916. The letters were filled with diplomatic language, but for the Arabs they represented a solemn British commitment. Sharif Hussein outlined his territorial demands for an independent Arab state with considerable ambition. His vision was largely based on the Damascus Protocol, a document drafted by Arab nationalist secret societies. This protocol defined the boundaries of the proposed Arab nation. It was to include the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula, excluding Aden, which was a British protectorate. Crucially, it also encompassed Greater Syria. This meant modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. Furthermore, it included the Mesopotamian provinces, which would later form Iraq. Hussein and his supporters believed these lands were intrinsically Arab, united by language, culture, and history. They yearned to see them consolidated into a single, sovereign political entity. The British promises, as conveyed by McMahon, appeared to endorse this grand vision. While McMahon introduced certain reservations, The overarching message was one of support for Arab self-determination across these vast territories. Beyond the mere recognition of independence, Britain offered further assurances. They pledged to guarantee the holy places. This was a commitment of immense significance, particularly for Sharif Hussein as the guardian of Mecca and Medina. It also implicitly covered Jerusalem. Additionally, Britain offered advice and assistance to the new Arab government. This was understood by Hussein as a supportive partnership, not a means of control. The Sharif was also led to believe that he might become the caliph of this new united Arabia, a powerful religious and political aspiration. However, within McMahon's carefully constructed letters lay the seeds of future discord, territorial ambiguities and exclusions. In his pivotal letter of October 24, 1915, McMahon stated that portions of Syria lying to the west of the districts of Damascus, Homs, Hama and Aleppo could not be included in the Arab state. His rationale was that these areas were not purely Arab. He cited the presence of French interests and Christian populations, particularly Maronites in Mount Lebanon. Sharif Hussein, in his reply, contested this exclusion regarding Beirut, insisting its population was Arab. He reluctantly accepted the exclusion of Mersina and Adana in southern Anatolia, acknowledging their Turkish character. But the status of coastal Syria and Palestine remained dangerously vague. The language used by the British was deliberately imprecise in critical areas. This allowed for flexible interpretations that would later serve British imperial interests. The exact nature of the advice and assistance was never clearly defined. Would it be benign support, or would it evolve into a form of indirect rule? Similarly, the term independence itself was open to question. Did it mean full, unadulterated sovereignty or a limited autonomy under British influence? The British were navigating a complex geopolitical landscape. They had to balance their desire for Arab support against their own imperial ambitions and their commitments to other allies, notably France. These ambiguities, glossed over in the urgency of wartime alliance, would prove devastating to Arab hopes. Placing his faith in British assurances, Sharif Hussein fulfilled his part of the momentous bargain. In June 1916, the Arab revolt erupted in the Hejaz. Led by Hussein's sons, Ali, Abdullah, Faisal and Zaid, Arab forces attacked Ottoman garrisons. British liaison officers, most famously T.E. Lawrence, provided military expertise, weapons and gold. The revolt was a significant contribution to the Allied war effort in the Middle East. Arab fighters, motivated by the promise of freedom, engaged in guerrilla warfare. They disrupted the Hejaz Railway, a vital Ottoman supply line. They captured key Red Sea ports like Aqaba and Jeddah. The revolt tied down tens of thousands of Ottoman troops who could otherwise have been deployed on other fronts. Unbeknownst to Sharif Hussein and his Arab forces fighting in the desert, Britain was simultaneously weaving a web of contradictory agreements. Even as McMahon was exchanging letters with Hussein, British diplomats were engaged in secret negotiations with their allies. The most notorious of these was the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Concluded in May 1916, this secret pact between Britain and France, with Russian and later Italian acquiescence, planned the partition of the Ottoman Arab territories. It allocated spheres of direct control and indirect influence to the European powers. France was to receive Syria and Lebanon. Britain was to gain control over Mesopotamia, Iraq, and the territory that would become Transjordan. Palestine was slated for international administration, a complex compromise reflecting competing interests. The duplicity did not cease with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. In November 1917, the British government issued another fateful declaration. This was the Balfour Declaration, a public statement of policy from British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour. It declared British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. This declaration was primarily aimed at galvanizing Jewish support for the Allied cause, particularly in Russia and the United States. However, Palestine was a land that Sharif Hussein understood to be part of the promised independent Arab state. The Balfour Declaration therefore stood in direct contradiction to the assurances given to the Arabs through McMahon. It attempted to safeguard the rights of existing non-Jewish communities, but its implications for Arab sovereignty in Palestine were profound and ominous. While British double-dealing was a primary factor in the betrayal of Arab aspirations, it is also important to acknowledge internal dynamics within the Arab world. The Arab regions were not a monolithic bloc. Various rivalries existed between prominent families and leaders. Some Arab notables, like Ibn Saud in Central Arabia, were competitors to Sharif Hussein's Hashemite family. Others remained loyal to the Ottoman Caliphate or sought accommodations with European powers independently. These internal divisions and power struggles were sometimes exploited by imperial strategists. Furthermore, personal ambitions and greed among some Arab figures also played a part in the complex political landscape. This shared responsibility, however, does not diminish the profound impact of the calculated deceit embedded in British wartime diplomacy. When World War I concluded with an Allied victory, the Ottoman Empire lay in ruins. The victorious powers, particularly Britain and France, convened to reshape the world map. At the Paris Peace Conference and subsequent negotiations, the promises made to Sharif Hussein through the McMahon-Hussein correspondence were systematically sidelined. The secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, now publicly revealed by the Bolsheviks in Russia, largely formed the blueprint for the region's future. Instead of the grand unified Arab kingdom for which they had fought, the Arab lands of the former Ottoman Empire were carved into a series of new states. These states were then placed under British and French control through the League of Nations mandate system. The new political entities were often demarcated by arbitrary borders. These lines in the sand were drawn by colonial administrators in London and Paris. They frequently ignored long-standing ethnic, tribal, sectarian, and economic realities on the ground. Communities found themselves divided by new international frontiers, while historically distinct or rival groups were sometimes forced together within the confines of a single state. Syria and Lebanon became French mandates. Iraq and the newly created Transjordan, modern Jordan, fell under British mandate. Sharif Hussein's sons, Faisal and Abdullah, were eventually installed as kings in Iraq and Transjordan respectively. These roles were, however, largely symbolic, representing a pale shadow of the independent, unified Arabia they had been promised. The consequences for Palestine were particularly tragic and have had enduring international repercussions. The Balfour Declaration was incorporated into the terms of the British Mandate for Palestine. This facilitated increased Jewish immigration and land purchase, often leading to the displacement of Arab tenant farmers. The indigenous Arab population, which constituted the overwhelming majority, viewed these developments with alarm and resentment. Their aspirations for self-determination in their own land were systematically denied. Rising tensions between the Arab and Jewish communities erupted into sporadic violence which escalated over the Mandate period. The broken promises concerning Palestine laid the direct groundwork for the Arab-Israeli conflict, a defining feature of the 20th and 21st centuries. The McMahon-Hussein correspondence and its ultimate betrayal left an indelible mark on Arab consciousness. It engendered a profound and lasting sense of bitterness and mistrust towards Western powers. This sentiment has shaped political discourse and attitudes in the Middle East for over a century. The arbitrarily drawn borders and the imposition of client regimes contributed to decades of political instability, authoritarian rule, and internal conflict. The quest for genuine sovereignty, Arab unity, and self-determination remains a powerful undercurrent in regional politics. The broken promises of World War I are not merely historical grievances, they are foundational events whose consequences continue to reverberate, casting a long and troubled shadow over the modern Middle East.